Hi, everyone, and welcome. I'm Joseph Kim, the CEO of LILA Games, and we are a free-to-play game startup working on an exciting new FPS shooter game. And today I'm joined by Sertac Pickakci, now CEO at Masomo, and Masomo has recently announced their acquisition by Miniclip. And so the focus of our discussion today is basically coming from two perspectives. First, from my perspective as a relatively new venture-backed gaming studio, and Sertac with a very recent experience of incorporation into the broader Miniclip group. So we will discuss the current opportunity landscape, meaning both challenges and opportunities for new mobile gaming studios in the current environment. And Sertac, before we jump in, do you want to talk a little bit more about Massimo and the recent acquisition news by Miniclip?
Sure, absolutely. First of all, thanks for the invite. So Masomo, we were actually founded in 2013. Currently, we are a little bit more than 100 people company. We have two live games in the market right now, Headball 2 and Basketball Arena. So far, we've had 350 million players actually played our games for the last 3 or 4 years. We build products and then we execute our go-to-market campaigns all in-house. So I think it's a great ability to actually execute all those things internally without the need of help of anyone. That's a great ability to do actually. We're a profitable company, and we were acquired by Miniclip in 2019. And then since the acquisition, things have been going actually super fun and fine. I believe we established a great environment to actually build on top of what we have achieved so far, and then build on top of that. I think we're going to be talking about those things in detail. So that's all about it for Masama for now.
Okay, so the acquisition was actually in 2019. Sorry about that. But
Yes. Yeah.
so I wanted to start by talking about the current opportunity for new startups. As a games company CEO myself that recently raised funding, and we should have another announcement coming out shortly. One of the things that we're seeing is that the funding environment right now is really good. We see lots of new game studios are getting funded. I will say that I believe that Series A, at least for us, was a lot harder than the seed round. But at least I think if you were to think in terms of the historical context on a relative basis, the current moment in time seems better than ever. Even further, when we look at like the game studio ecosystem, there's been a huge wave of consolidation over the past 5 years, especially at the mid-tier scale. So we've been seeing, whether it's companies like Zynga who have been active in Turkey, or other companies, Stillfront, Embracer, companies like that. There has been like this huge wave that's kind of taken out, at least in my opinion, a lot of the mid-tier scale players. And so from my perspective, there's a bit of a gap in terms of companies at scale, suggesting that maybe it might be a good time for newer startups entering the space that are recently getting funded. So I also think we should talk about kind of headwinds in addition to tailwinds. But speaking on this topic of opportunity, Sartaj, from your perspective, if we're focusing on the opportunity topic right now, what do you see as positive aspects or tailwinds for new game studios in the current environment?
Yeah, absolutely. So, first of all, I truly believe that it's a great timing for start a new gaming company, especially when it comes to finding the venture capital to actually kick the things off. So, long story short, actually, funding is easier than ever. If your team is made of actually, if your core team is made of very experienced people, you're gonna get some funding somehow. Like back in the days when the mobile gaming first started, the first pioneers of this industry, they had only like a PowerPoint slide, and then they can actually show it to the investors and get the investment. Right now, I'm going extremes, but you don't even need a PowerPoint slide. If your core team is actually made of very experienced, very talented group of people, you're gonna get a funding. Even if you don't know what to do, you'll figure something out, and then they're gonna give you the money. So yeah, funding is easier than ever. The competition is super aggressive, yes, but if you are profitable or almost profitable, the valuations are actually way higher than ever before. So it's also great to actually make a good exit. And then more and more people are playing games, by the way. So after the pandemic, the addressable market size has actually grown. There were people who would never think that they would play any mobile game or video game before, but because they were stuck at home for 1 year or so, they started playing games and they actually realized it's a fun thing to do. So your addressable market is actually also growing with the smartphone penetration and all those things. And then on top of that, the know-how is also increasing both on the venture capital side and also the team that you are building. On when it comes to VCs or the angel investors and stuff like that, they had only money back in the days, but they didn't know any know-how. They no learnings about how to succeed, how to fail, no learnings about the industry back in the days. But right now, the VCs, they have the money, but at the same time, they have a lot of learnings because there has been a lot of failures, a lot of learnings, a lot of successes. So there's actually something great to build up on. So VCs have money and plus know-how right now, and especially when it comes to talent. Back in the days, again, when you hire someone, they were not in a position to say, oh, I did this before and I can do this again in here. That's my learning. That's the best practice. You were not able to hear that back in the days. But right now, because a lot of gaming startups, because a lot of gaming companies in the world, the talent, the human resources actually also learning. So these are actually, it's a complex, the challenging thing to hire talent. But when you hire talent, at least they have a way better how to operate games, how to scale games when compared to maybe 2 or 3 years ago. So that these are the things I would say are the opportunities to start a new gaming company nowadays.
Yeah, I would agree with you, especially on your point, Sertac, about the audience. I do think that because of COVID, we do have like a bigger base. And maybe the other aspect of that with regard to audience is that we've had, for example, this younger generation of players that have actually grown up on free to play. So there isn't like that stigma that we sometimes have with like some of the older, grumpier guys who are like, I'll never pay for, like the free to play, whatever. It's evil, it's whatever. And so like, players that are more used to the free-to-play model, as well as being more active on mobile devices, especially that younger generation that are growing up. So we're seeing this generation come up that are more, that to your point is increasing the base and the audience size. And I think, a couple other points just to make would be, I think that there's currently like this narrative around IDFA deprecation. You could view this as both, like a lot of the bigger guys will say, well, this is actually a headwind for you in that, they'll be able to leverage first party data for cross promo and building UA data optimization capabilities. And we have seen a number of game companies see margin compression as they're no longer able to effectively market their games as before. However, I think the other thing that I have not seen yet, at least in terms of like the mid-core or hardcore games, is like that ability to take that first party data and to effectively deploy it as well as they would like to do, or as well as they say that they can. So that's still something that I haven't seen play out. So what that means is that when you look at certain categories where you have incumbents that are entrenched in certain categories with long payback windows, right? Mid-core, hardcore games with like 2-year payback windows, they could use this moat of user acquisition and marketing budget against insurgents and newer players coming in. And so that's not necessarily the case anymore, at least for some of those game genres. And I also just feel that, now is also a good time, just in the sense that, as I had mentioned, in terms of like, if you believe that the mid-tier is a little bit hollowed out right now, that, those are the players that I worry about the most, because they are the mid-tier scale players, are the players that not only have adequate resources to be dangerous in terms of like product development and marketing, but they also have that existential pressure to a larger degree than like the bigger players, which may be slower, have a lot of politics, may not be able to operate as efficiently and effectively as some of the smaller guys, to be able to compete with incredible speed and with deep conviction. And so from my perspective, those are some of the reasons why I do think that this is a good time, and some of the trends playing into why now is a great time to have opportunity to start a gaming studio.
Yep.
So, with all that said, let's also just be fair. Let's talk about some of the headwinds, some of the challenges. I personally am experiencing a number of challenges in terms of like, working in a remote environment, especially, from my perspective, I think that like the 0 to 1, the new game development aspect is very, very difficult from a remote context. I think hiring and recruitment has been a pretty massive challenge. And certainly if you're a larger company with more resources, it's a little bit easier to be able to pay higher salaries and things like that. And there's that narrative around post IDFA deprecation, which you could argue if they figured it out, could be deployed as an advantage from a user acquisition and marketing perspective. But Sertac, for you, in terms of whether it's some of the things that I had just mentioned right now in terms of challenges or other challenges, how do you think about some of the things that new game studios trying to find success, what should they be looking out for? Or what are some of the challenges that you see in front of them in the current environment?
Yep. Well, I'll answer your question from a perspective of a new gaming company.
Mhm.
So, I think there are two categories when it comes to categorizing those challenges. Number one category is remote working. And number two category is the cost of testing new things, cost of failure is actually going higher and higher. So when it comes to the first category of remote working, yes, it has a lot of advantages. I totally understand it. I totally get it. But when it comes to setting up something from scratch, building the company first, and then building your first product, you're going to have to be making a lot of strategic, important decisions. And based on my experience, when it comes to making those important decisions, yes, you can use Zoom, Google Meet, all these platforms, but face to face, in front of a whiteboard, all together, challenging different ideas and etc., it is irreplaceable.
Right.
That feeling, that sensation, that efficiency, I don't think any technology that we have so far has fixed that problem. Even for Masomo, for us, when the pandemic first started, we are an established company when compared to a brand new company. But when the pandemic started, we failed so bad working remotely. Like for the first 4, 5, 6 months, we couldn't really figure out how to efficiently continue our processes. And I can imagine when you are building a company and your first product from scratch, working fully remote, it doesn't matter if you're key talent or like operation people working remote, everyone should be talking to each other to build
Right.
something from scratch in a very proper way. So I would say working remote is a big challenge if you are building something from scratch. And when it comes to the second category of testing new things, cost of failure is increasing. I will approach this from a funnel approach. The first step of the funnel is definitely setting up your team. And the second step is building your product. And the third step is go to market. So when you look at the first step of the funnel, which is building your team, it is getting more expensive. And Turkey, it's pretty hot market right now. There are a lot of like huge investments going on.
Right.
And as a side effect, I would say it is increasing the cost of hiring talent because you have a lot of actually VC money coming in, and then you raise the average salaries within the Turkish market. So
Right.
it is actually, I would say, unfortunately, but at the same time, fortunately for the employees, they are getting paid better. They're working in a better environment. So the cost of building a team is actually going higher. So that's the first step. And if you go big in one project and if it fails, it's going to hit you really hard financially. So it's a big challenge. The second step of the funnel is building your product. So when you are building your MVP, minimum viable product, the scope of MVPs are getting bigger and bigger every year. If you wanted to launch a game without this and that feature, it might be okay when you asked this question 1 or 2 years ago. But right now, even your minimum viable product has to have some decent set of features. So the cost of building your product, and therefore, if it fails, it is actually getting more and more expensive. And the third step is the marketing, go to market. As you mentioned, the IDFA deprecation, all these consolidation stuff that you mentioned, it is actually pushing the CPIs even higher. because there are big companies you can spend, as you mentioned, also for like 2 year ROI windows. And if you're a new startup company, you don't have that luxury for most of the startups. So that being competitive in the user acquisition landscape, it's getting more and more difficult, which means you're not able to scale your game, not able to gain attraction, and therefore convince your investors to go for like additional rounds. And also on top of that, making sure that you have the right creatives. You have to spend a lot of budget to even to test your best star creative. All those things are actually making the things more and more expensive. So I would say, yes, you can find money easily, but you have to take into consideration all these like high level topics that I mentioned from a funnel perspective when you are raising money. Otherwise, it's going to be a very challenging, tough months and years coming for you.
Yeah, Sertac, I'm actually quite surprised on just how much in alignment we are on some of these challenges. I totally agree with you. I know it's controversial, but it's kind of not popular or kind of PC to say that remote work for new game development is not the best, or maybe somebody's figured it out. I know I haven't. I know when I was in India working with the team together, we were just so much more effective, so much more efficient. Things were so much better. And then, I'm back here in the US right now, but we're just waiting for our office to get set up. But yeah, I literally can't wait to get back there. And it's a major challenge. The hiring and retention issue you mentioned, we're seeing that right now. Like, our guys are getting hit up on LinkedIn daily. It's just like, and then just comp is just skyrocketing, especially for engineering in particular. But yeah, I would absolutely agree with you. And probably like to your last point on marketing, the one other issue I think is like there's a lot of popularity now with multiplayer and PvP games, but those kind of games are very sensitive to scale. And so understanding that, what kind of scale is going to be necessary for you to provide the game experience, even with bots, right? And so then to your point on that marketing budget, I worry more about like the initial scale required as opposed to like payback windows. But yeah, that's certainly something that I think that can come as a surprise to some folks when they try to get to the scale that they need to provide a good experience for their players. And just kind of moving along, I know we're a little bit tight on time here, but in terms of like the opportunity landscape, I mean, for me, one of the biggest surprises from last year was actually the success of Turkey's own Dream Games, who basically upended the match 3 market with, Royal Clash. And one way I think about opportunity for new game studios to think about, looking for opportunities where where it's new, where it's growing very quickly, or that may be a little bit too small for bigger players. Now, Dream took the complete opposite approach, going for a super huge, super entrenched, super competitive market, but they competed with really extreme depth and experience in that game category. And so, Sertac, when you think about new studios and how you think about opportunities in the current market, whether it's in terms of approach, genre, specific trends, things like that, what advice would you have for new game studios in thinking about specific kinds of opportunities?
Well, it will be something similar to what Dream Games did. My suggestion, my advice would be that whatever you do, whatever you were doing back in the days, I think you should be sticking to it, and then find some significant efficiencies to actually build something more on top of that. So that will be my advice actually, because as I mentioned earlier, the cost of trying new things is actually going higher, and yes, we say that VCs are actually giving you more money more easily, but there's definitely one certain condition that if you are doing something that you have been doing back in the days. That's, I think, the common denominator for all these like money that you receive from those VCs. So I think that's what happened to Dream Games, and I think that's what happened to other new gaming startups. So if you can stick to what you were doing, I think it will be easier for you to raise money and then find some efficiencies to build more on top of that. Like Masomo is something was something similar back in the days. We were actually really good at real-time multiplayer mobile experiences. So we actually built on top of that, and continued doing these kind of games, because that's what we are really good at. That's what our expertise is on. And then we actually maintained our cash flow by doing whatever we know the best. And then now maybe we're going to be moving on to new genres after we make sure that our cash flow is strong. So we don't want
Right.
to move on to new games before we actually have some like financial help. So that's why I think sticking to what you know the best is the best advice that I would say. And the second thing is when you're building something, you have to build something with marketing first mindset. Yes, you might have a very decent product, very nice product, but if it's not marketable, if the CPIs are too high, then unfortunately, you're not going to be able to achieve anything. I'm going extremes in here again at a very high level. So that's why the other advice that I would say is definitely think about marketing first before you start building something.
Yeah. Um, I think I would agree with you, but more situationally, right? Like I would really encourage studios to think about their own situational context. I mean, you either have extreme depth like Dream Games, or go for differentiation, or go for difficulty. One of those kind of 3Ds, right? Where you're going for something where you have to find what your specific advantage is. And I'm a little bit, discouraged by a number of folks where, I talked to some game studios and they, kind of like their approach is to just build a game that they may not have the extreme depth around, but they're going to make kind of like a worse version. I'm like, why? Just change up the theme a little bit. And it's just like, why? So if you're not, if you're not deeper than everybody else, then I do think from my perspective, you should be going for differentiation. Okay, and so maybe the last topic before hopefully we have a little bit more time for Q&A is this notion of the path of independence. And really talking about this notion of the role of collaboration versus remaining independent. And I know Massimo went through kind of that in 2019 in joining Miniclip, but when you think about the current market environment, when you think about things like whether it's external publishing versus self-publishing, or operating as an independent studio, or to join a group like as Massimo has done with joining Miniclip, like how would you characterize the advantages and disadvantages in those different models? How do you think about that, Sertac?
Yep. I think joining a big group like Miniclip, for example, is the best way to go. But it definitely depends on your current capabilities. Like I mentioned earlier, Masomo is a company who can actually build products and then execute go-to-market strategy all internally. You don't actually need a publisher or cash or talent or know-how from like external resources. So I think for companies with the same as our case, I would say just go partner with a bigger company and then use their skill sets, know-hows, use them as a consultant. And that's actually what we have been doing with Miniclip. Like they didn't really, after the acquisition, Miniclip didn't really invade us and then forced us to actually change our processes, change our know-how and all those things. They actually stayed away and then place themselves as consultants. So whenever we need help, we just actually reach them. And there's always someone actually who can answer your questions. So for all those reasons, I think it's great to be part of a bigger company nowadays. All these like talent, when it comes to talent hiring, for example, when you say that we're part of Miniclip, when you join Masomo, you will actually benefit from the Miniclip's portfolio of games, portfolio of know-how, and all those things. It actually makes the things much more easier. You can leverage the scale of economies, have better relationship with the platforms like Google and Apple. So there are actually a lot of advantages if you're able to do a lot of stuff on your own. So these things actually build on top of your own existing capabilities. So I would just say go for partnering with a bigger company like Miniclip, for example, if you can, for sure.
Right. And maybe I could just end with one bit of advice for new game studios who may not be, part of a larger organization or things like of that nature, which is like, if you don't have that kind of larger organizational context, I do believe that information is power. And so kind of like the James Altucher notion of a scene or a tribe, but getting like a small private group together, because I truly believe that the games industry is an infinite game, and the Simon Sinek sort of James Karst notion of the infinite game. So like if you're able to get a small group of people in the industry together where you share best practices and help each other, I definitely think that that is another way of potentially, trying to mitigate some of the information advantages of being part of a larger organization. And with that, I think there was something going on with the camera. So does that mean we're out of time, Burke or Batu? I guess we could try and take a quick question or two before our time runs out here. So it looks like a question. I'll read it. So from Steve Kandar, game designer at Onisoft Games, how can we ensure long-lasting work relationships with talented game developers? Sertac, you want to take that?
Well, yeah, it's a great question. So I'll speak at a very high level. So first of all, definitely financials wise, it needs to be around the benchmark levels in the gaming industry. And second thing is because they are, I'm assuming talented, I'm assuming also like senior and experienced developers, they also are looking for the company vision, company strategy. Like, what are we trying to achieve in here? What's our purpose? How am I contributing to this like ultimate goal? This is the, I think, second non-financial aspect of it. So if you can actually financially and non-financially satisfy those people and open their vision, open their minds to actually go big, I think it will help you build a long-lasting work relationship. Joseph, what do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I fundamentally believe that, you need to have some kind of organizational differentiation. And ultimately, I think the way that organizations are moving now and into the future is really going to be based upon the kind of culture that you have at the company, but also like providing, to your point, Sertac, some notion of meaning or purpose. And so I do think like there are reasons why people work like crazy at a company like Tesla or companies like that, where I think that if you're doing something more meaningful or providing some way that is different, so either you're a learning organization, you've got a mission, or you've got something beyond just the money, because as we talked about before, it seems like a lot of the money is there at any organization these days. Okay, are there any sparks for team success? How can you motivate your team for remote controls? COVID would strengthen the game market, but it also made working remotely a new model. Some companies have evaluated this very well, while others have had problems. How can we do studio success and crisis management in such situations?
Well, my answer would be yes, remote work actually brings hybrid working maybe brings a lot of opportunities. And what we are doing right now is, as I mentioned earlier, again, when we need to make some strategic decisions, some important decisions, some key people actually meet in the office. We sit together and then make long discussions about what to do next. But the operational team, the other team members actually, they're at home. They are working remotely because they know what to do, because they have the guidelines and all those things. And there are some good platforms. So I think all these like strategic decisions are made in the office with some leadership team, but the ongoing daily operations are done remotely. I think that's a good balance of getting the most out of this working remote model for established company like Masomo.
Yeah, and I think from my perspective, I think the issue with remote versus in person in office really has to do with a few different factors. And I think one of it has to do with, especially, when you're a new team, you don't know each other that well. Your primary form of communication is having to schedule and jump on a Zoom. So the communication flow is not as natural as if you're in the office and you could just easily turn to somebody and talk about something. And certainly I think that just the reality of human beings is that you have sensitivities. And so like in some cases, it's going to take you going out to dinner, having drinks, and then it's like, okay, this thing's been bothering me for 3 months. Here it is, right? That doesn't happen over Zoom, right? And so the serendipitous types of conversations, the things that happen in a very high bandwidth way, because you're all sitting together, you're able to draw something very quickly on a whiteboard and things like that. those are the kinds of things where, to Sertac's point, and this is something where I'm glad to see that we're aligned on this, is that when you've got a highly complex problem with a lot of different inputs and outputs and like all sorts of things changing, that's harder to do remote versus where you've got already a process that's well established. Everything's kind of figured out already. So like if you're live 1 to N, you're already live operating a game and you're turning the crank. Do you need to be in person in office? Probably not. But for me, those are some of the situations that come up. And so some of the like building a new game in a remote environment types of complexities that I think would need to be solved are getting people to be able to communicate better and in a more high bandwidth way. All right. One other question came in. Hikmet Guler, co-founder at Scope Games. Hi, this is Hikmet from Scope Games. Thanks for the great sessions. How do you think startups should approach on financial KPIs while they are presenting their pitch decks to the VCs if there is no live product to show any data? Especially, what is your suggestion for showing ROI to investors on early stages of startups? Thank you for your time. Well, maybe I could kind of take this first because, we recently have raised some money. I think that I'm not sure if investors are necessarily looking so much for specific financial KPIs. I basically did make a model that showed revenue and potential, and basically, forecast P&L and things of that nature. But I think it was more the investors seeing that we've kind of thought it through rather than whether they actually believe we're going to, exactly hit the forecast or the estimates that we came up with. And so I think from the perspective of fundraising and new startups looking for money, I would probably focus more in terms of, what is your thesis? What is your specific story? Who are you guys? And why do you think you're going to be successful? And then I do think that investors might, in terms of my opinion, is that the more you can do on the financial side, just making sure that they understand that you've really thought through the business side and you're not just kind of pulling numbers just completely out of your buttocks, so that you've actually put some thought into it, I think is what they're looking for, rather than something that they think is going to be an exact, forecast of what your business is going to look like in the future. Sertac, any thoughts on that?
Well, I totally agree with all the things that you mentioned. Like one thing that maybe I can add on top of that is I think what investors really looking for in today's world is, are you really aware of the challenges that you're facing? And if you are really aware of those challenges and you have some mitigation plans already lined up in your pitch deck, for example, I think that's the team that I would invest in, because they know that it's not like they're not sugarcoating the things. Things are actually, yes, these are the challenges. Yes, these are the mitigation plans. I think that's what you can show to the investors before there is no live product or any data that you can show.
Oh, more questions. I guess if depth is a differentiation, like in the Royal Match case, can another team come up with a game design that has more depth than Royal Match? If yes, what will be the role of marketing power compared to game design? I could take a stab at that. I don't know if you necessarily would go deeper than Royal Match, but deep in the sense that you understand the product, the audience, the specific nuances of that genre. So or you have a specific insight into what's going to make it work, right? And so I don't think like with that specific approach that Dream took, the depth would tell you what other specific twist or specific, variation of gameplay theme and kind of like how they actually, understood what matters and what's going to make one player jump from their game to your game. I think that's what it's going to take. And then in terms of the marketing power, I would say that it does, in my opinion, it does depend. I do think that it would depend on your specific situation, the type of game that you have, whether you're using IP or not, whether you're a mid-core or hardcore game relative to a more casual game and things like that. But does marketing make a difference? Absolutely. And then I would say, like, to the degree, I would say, like, one thing that would help is the degree of differentiation, right? Like the more that you have the Hollywood notion of a strange attractor, where when you get into the game, you immediately feel something different, that helps you with the marketing. If you can, to Sertac's point, even kind of test how certain concepts would work even before you launch the game, I think that sort of thing helps as well. Sertac, I don't know if you have anything to add to that.
Well, again, all good points, Joseph. I think for Royal Match, deeper than that might alienate your potential audience. Maybe it's not because there's a sweet spot, you know, like when you make it super deep, it doesn't mean it's gonna really like super successful. There's a sweet spot in that, and I think Royal Match is doing a great example of finding that sweet spot. And marketing, yes, I think like Dream Games, they're getting all that investment. I think, I don't know it, but from my um, assumptions, I think they're spending most of that money for user acquisition. So definitely, marketing is a huge component of being successful, especially in that very crowded, very competitive genre. Game design also supports that. They are not like independent from each other. If you have a great game design, if you can retain those players for the very long term, yes, the marketing will be more meaningful, and you can actually build on top of that and have a healthy, profitable business in the long term.
Yeah, and just for clarification, what I meant by depth, it isn't really about the gameplay itself, but more the team and the depth of the understanding of a genre or the audience or a specific gameplay mechanic, right? And I would say that maybe the other way to think about it is, you know, depth in terms of, do you understand, like you could take different approaches, but like if you're Riot, you try to understand the player the most. If you're Blizzard, you try to understand the gameplay mechanic the most. So whatever, again, who you are, what your strengths are, but you should have depth in terms of understanding rather than, you know, and that's what I meant, rather than the gameplay or the meta or things of that nature.
Okay, okay. Now it's much more clear. Yeah, I
Yeah.
totally
I was
agree.
trying to explain to the person asking the question. All right, cool. Well, I think
All right.
that's it, everyone. Sertac, thanks so much. Again, congrats on the promotion. Best of luck to you over at Masomo. And for yeah, maybe one last thing. If anyone wants to get in touch with you, Sertac, how can they get in touch with you?
Well, they can reach out to me on LinkedIn. I think that would be the best way to approach. Yeah, that's what I can say.
Okay. And maybe what I could say for everyone is like LILA Games, we're hiring. So check us out, lilagames.com. And if you want to read a game development newsletter, go to gamemakers.com or gamemakers.substack.com. Thanks, everybody. Bye.
Cheers. Bye.